My name is Lucy Newcomb. I'm the CEO and host of this episode of Staying Global While Staying Home, Solutions for Pandemic Business Leaders Around the Globe. Today, I'm so pleased to be able to spend time with and share lessons from C.H. Lowe, who's the director of the MIDA office here in Silicon Valley. MIDA stands for Malaysian Investment Development Authority. Before we go on to talk a little bit more about that, let me just tell you a little bit about CH, as we affectionately refer to him. He has been head of this office since 2017, after graduating with a degree in electrical engineering, perfect for the Valley here, and then going on to obtain an advanced credential in financial management at Cornell. He specializes in bringing Malaysian companies to the United States and vice versa. He's got some really interesting tales to tell with us and tell us, and lessons for us to learn about going global, especially in ASEAN, and the special attributes that Malaysia has to offer American businesses. Welcome, CH. You want to tell us a little about MIDA?
Thank you, Lucy. Always a pleasure, and thanks for inviting. So yeah, sure. Our office has been here since 1999, and then we mainly serves the US companies here who have interest to set up operations in Malaysia, or any kind of business opportunities to help companies expand by using Malaysia as their hub in Southeast Asia. So I mainly work with the corporates for America. I mean, from the America side, and as you imagine, that includes like mostly big corporations. And I think because Malaysia has a pretty strong foundation in serving US companies, like we have been the first offshore location for Intel since 1970s, and that has grown leaps and bounds after that. So just continue to be here, build relationships, and continue to help. Happy to help, US companies and Malaysian companies to do more businesses together.
Thank you. Well, we'll talk more about that in a few minutes in our conversation, but I didn't realize that Intel had been there since the 1970s. That's really impressive. As you know, I had the pleasure of spending time in Malaysia as a speaker for the US State Department, and had the pleasure of going to 5 different locations. So I got to see a fair amount, and it only makes me want to go back, both as a business person and as a tourist. It's a beautiful country, and I was so impressed with the business acumen and the dedication of talented professionals. And it's been a pleasure to continue to work on that bridge, and I look forward to doing more of that with you and your team.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you look at the history of Intel Malaysia, they always will show a picture of like Andy Grove, like walking through like a agriculture. Like I think it was a rice farming in Penang. So I think it was the first factory that broken ground in Southeast Asia at that time. So, and then that operation has grown, a lot since then. It started with assembly, and then gradually, I think in the 1990s, like they started to do more like shared services function, and then it gradually grows into more design and development activities right now. So I think today Intel has more than 4,000 engineers just works on developing products, supporting the US operations here. They have the whole IoT group based in Malaysia, and even some of the most advanced technologies like autonomous driving. I think some of the data center applications and all that, I think Malaysia plays a very key part into that. So we are working a lot together with Intel to basically promote that, to sell, the Malaysian story, because not many people know about that. And
no,
thank you for approaching me and to suggest this session, because I think definitely we need to do a lot more promotional sound bites about Malaysia, and to introduce Malaysia to people in the Valley.
I think that sounds great. I'm looking forward to assisting with that. And yeah, I was really sold. I did a lot of work in Africa, so I was very surprised to be called to ASEAN. And it was a life-changing moment for me. And I won't gush further, but I'm very glad you're here. And thanks for sharing some of those tales. Let's go a little bit deeper about American companies while we're on the subject, and talk about, the subject of our podcast, of our webcast here. How are American companies navigating the pandemic in Malaysia? And maybe you want to set the stage for us about what's happening with the pandemic in Malaysia as context for those comments.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everywhere is the same. Like it's a very challenging operating environment, like regardless of like which corner you're at in the world right now. So Malaysia, like we did pretty well in managing a pandemic in the beginning, right? I think there was a time that I think the national confirmed number of positive cases was 2 digits for several weeks, and then because of because of several events and things like because the culture there as well, because people tend to like to go to office and work, and it's just the difference between companies in the valley and companies in Malaysia, right? Because work from home is still not a norm there. So when people go to work, when people starts to kind of like move around, and then that's where like the COVID cases comes back. But then on our level, we're trying our best to facilitate US companies to go into Malaysia, because border control is strict right now, like most of the countries. And it requires a lot of education and creating that awareness with the immigration authorities about, and health officials as well, on how to make sure that businesses can maintain open, and then to make sure business activities can continue, people can still meet. So yeah, that's we spend a lot of energy in that for the past several months or a year, that to kind of facilitate that, right? Then I think for companies like seeking for market entry or even setting up operations in Malaysia, they're required to send like quite a lot of executives into the country, just to make sure they do the proper site selections and stuff like that.
Right.
So so naturally, border restrictions become an issue, and we're trying our best to try to bridge the gap between authorities and try to provide solution to the company on that aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't we take a quick minute to talk about Lamb Research and
Sure.
your recent go-to-market assistance with them.
Mhm.
Even in a pandemic, I think that's very impressive and certainly relevant to what we're doing here on the webcast. You want to talk in brief about that?
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell you whatever there's public, right? That's published.
Right.
So just a little background about the operation, because about the project. So it was the first meeting that I had when I came to San Jose, like in
Oh,
2017, and it's like a full circle. Like it might be the last project that I handle. I don't know. So Lam Research like is setting up like a 700,000 square feet factories in Malaysia, and they would do very high-end, sophisticated manufacturing and semiconductor equipment, semicon cap as they call in the industry. And it's an area where Malaysia does not have in the past. Like we do not have any semicon front-end cap equipment maker in Malaysia. So it kind of created like a shockwave throughout the industry. Like, hey, why is them looking at Malaysia but not the other competitors or companies, right? So then it brings a whole bunch of supply chain companies and at the same time going into Malaysia. So and we're I mean, I consider ourselves like blessed to have secured that project right in the beginning of the pandemic, because things would have taken a much dramatic shift if, let's say, the decision was dragged on for 6 months or 7 months after that. And I think part of why the decision was made by Lam was because businesses have to move on, and we all foresee like there is a strong demand going on in semicon cap market, which is evident through the chip shortage that you're seeing right now. So there's a need to urgently build up capacity, especially in Asia Pacific, where all the semiconductor fab is located at. So yeah, I think that it's a project that we are very proud of, and we're doing all we can to support that. And yeah, so it comes back to the original kind of like the issue that we talked about was the border restriction, right? So yeah, that's where I spend our energy on in supporting them.
and were there any particular, thanks for that. And were there any particular, I don't want to say hacks, because that minimizes the seriousness of this situation, which is of course very serious. But are there any particular, let's say, workarounds, any solutions that you and Lam working together found that were necessary and helpful? Because go-to-market is always tough, and then semiconductors and that technical level tougher, and then a pandemic, holy cow. So did you find some particularly helpful solutions you might want to pass along?
Sure, I think for Lamb's case, right? So because if we there are several pathways that you could enter into a market and set up operations. I think for their case, they chose to be send a bunch of expats into Malaysia because it's a new process, it's a new technology that we have never dealt with. We might not have the technical expertise in dealing with those technologies, right? So just send them there, let them settle down for 2 to 3 years and setting up the operation, rather than having people to go in and out, because God knows when the border situation will clear out. right? So that's really how we approach, you know, this project. And then yeah, I think it's very important to partner with governments, right? Because right now I think it's very important to know who to talk to and how to talk to them, and how should you plan for any business contingency plan, because border could be closed at any time, not only Malaysia, but even transiting countries, or even new rules surrounding, you know, traveling restrictions, and flights keep changing, you know, like it could be, I've heard executives who book a flight 2 weeks, I mean in 2 weeks time, but then the flight got changed like maybe one day before the flight time or something like that, and required testings and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, yeah.
So, uh, just so that we're clear for our audience, so Lamb was setting stuff up when it was not only the pandemic, but at least part of the time, Americans were not technically allowed in the country, correct?
Americans are allowed in the country, right? So
Now they are,
there
I
was,
mean, to arrive, not to live, but to arrive.
they're allowed to go into the country. Yes.
Okay.
You,
Because I know there was a time where we weren't. I remember my friend Michael posting this huge thing, all these people who cannot come here now. And right on the top was United States. I thought, well, you know, that's when we were in the peak of our pandemic. And I have to say, I understood the call. But I think that just that whole logistical hassle is such another,
sure,
is
sure.
another reason this is an impressive project, right?
Yeah,
CH, you
yeah,
really,
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right about there was a period of time when, but that was much earlier. I think it was
yes, yes, it
between
was
March
much
and
earlier.
June, when it's not country specific, but generally the border was closed. And then after that, I think one thing we learned out from the pandemic is the government learns a lot about supply chain, right? Because
Yes.
I think a lot of countries, they just, I mean, learn about that when there are companies who kind of call us and say, hey, do you know, like the chip that we're producing actually goes into the ventilators, or the chip you're producing actually goes into certain medical instruments used in the COVID combating, you know, applications or solutions. And then because Malaysia is such a hub for semiconductor backend assembly, and we have some fabs in Malaysia as well, so its application is very pervasive. So one thing that we kind of learned out from that is semiconductor manufacturing is essential, and the manufacturing industry in Malaysia is essential, right? So it's important to make sure that it keeps running, and because it's so integral to the global supply chain for medical devices, for electronics, for everything, right? And right now it's for automotive industry as well. So we keep the conversation open and keep engaging with companies, and even try to talk to the health ministry, try to make sure, you know, that the company follows the standard protocols that they set up upon, to make sure that they're allowed to operate. And I think so far, although it was a rough patch, right? It's not easy. No one has done that before. Then,
No.
but the recent lockdown that we announced in January, it was a much better situation compared to in March, when everything, no one's kind of know how to do things, right? So yeah.
And now you have a lockdown till March 4th, I understand.
Yes, yes. Now we have until March 4. Yeah. But I mean, I don't want to just talk about the border restriction thing. So
No,
if
no, but
yeah,
it's important. It's important for us to understand that you were successful. And in order to understand the magnitude of your success, we need to understand the magnitude of the problem. It was substantial. And so we're not being negative. We're just clarifying how awesome you are and how impressive that Lamb was willing to persevere. I think those are the things that I would want people to take away.
sure,
So
sure. So
thanks.
so
I understand.
yes, so we are not like trading LAMP differently than any other company. So we are
Right.
supporting other existing companies in Malaysia as well. And then I think this support, to combine that with a combination of, you know, cost competitiveness, infrastructure readiness, and relatively stable operating environment in Malaysia, it makes Malaysia kind of like a very attractive proposition for companies to set up a kind of like a niche manufacturing operations, or high end IP proprietary products. So I think if you kind of like dissect the kind of investments that goes into Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific in general, like there are those who always seeks for cost, right? It's always just to go to low cost. I don't think we're competing in that segment, and we shouldn't be competing in that, because there's always a cheaper location, right? And but the problem is, how do you maintain that cost competitiveness by a package, right? Like what do you get by every dollar you spend? So normally when companies does assessment on site selection throughout the region, we always get feedback from them that Malaysia is always on top or second, right? And
Great.
there's another end of the spectrum. Is like if you're looking for really high end technical talent, really high end operation, and you want to set up a regional hub. So that's an area that we're trying to drive towards, and we're doing all we can to set up policies and setting up facilitation services and keep engaging with companies and see how we could do better in that space. There are certain successes in that areas surrounding some of the projects that we're working on that is not announced yet. So yeah. So we're kind of like smack in the middle of that, right? It's where you kind of find a sweet spot between you get a diverse talent pool, and then you get a good cost structure, and then you get a relatively stable operating environment. And
Huge.
yeah, so that's kind of like where our position is, and that's why companies like Lam or Dexcom that was announced, and Intel and all that just keeps expanding in Malaysia. And I think definitely, I think you got to know more about Malaysia when you're there, right? So normally, once companies are there, they're happy about it, and they just want to do more things in Malaysia. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And it can be also a launching pad for other areas in the region too, right?
Yes, definitely for sure. Because of the kind of like diverse population that we have, I think we share almost the same kind of, I would say, ethnicity and people like Singapore, and
Right.
and then we're kind of like the close proximity to Singapore as a regional hub in Southeast Asia. So there is a general, like a natural extension whenever companies tend to expand. If they want more space, if they want more people, then I mean naturally people will look at Malaysia, right? If we're talking about the high-end projects, yeah.
Terrific. And then when you talked a little bit earlier about not just the impressive sort of bedrock of semiconductor companies that you have, but then starting to look at other high-end places, without talking about any specific deals here, what type of technologies would you be thinking of? More like data analytics or things like that? When you say high-end, what are you referring to specifically?
Sure. So because MIDA is more related to manufacturing services, so that's why I'm more expert in that area. Like I know more about that. But definitely, how do we grow out from that area is what that we are working on. So we are partnering with existing companies. Like I think we are working with Intel to develop more AI capabilities among
Yes, they
learning
are.
institutions in Malaysia. So that's in supportive. I mean that's we're also throwing some support for that effort. So and then trying to bring in more kind of like regional functions into Malaysia at the same time with several companies that we're talking to setting up not only like assembly, how do we grow from assembly into engineering and then into regional hub, or even like research and development capabilities, right? Just to leveraging onto our experience in the high-end product space, right? So many people might not know like a lot of the processors being used in data centers are basically produced in Malaysia, or a lot of chips that goes into our smartphones are actually made in Malaysia. So when you dissect the smartphone supply chain, like usually those that the headline grabbing news are the assembly part, right? But those are including, I mean, mostly are manual labor, just assemble stuffs.
Right.
There isn't a lot of like value add activities, but but the kind of like if you dissect the BOM cost for a smartphone or any smart devices these days, semiconductor actually is a substantial portion of that, right? And including the electric vehicles. Like I think as a lot of talks about batteries, but I believe that would become a commodity in future.
Yes.
And what sets companies apart could be how intelligent their car is, the autonomous system, the software, and also the hardware behind that to support that. And that comes from the chips and from semiconductor companies that we have a pretty strong reputation in the area, and we have a strong like kind of head start to other companies, to other countries. Yeah.
That's really exciting. It's wonderful to have bedrock industry, but the all eggs in one basket, we've all learned, diversification is a better plan. So I'm excited to hear how you're diversifying. I would not have thought of an EV being made in Malaysia, but why not?
Yeah. We don't have the population like Indonesia or
Right.
Thailand, right? But definitely we are involved in the supply chain for the chip side, for the board side, and for some of the development activities that we have through the existing companies in Malaysia, right? Yeah, and then I think interestingly recently, Porsche, the German sports car
Yes,
company,
of course.
there was a news that they are setting up a factory in Malaysia in collaboration with a Malaysian company. So
Perfect.
yeah, that's just one of the example. Like we are kind of like in a niche, kind of like high-end manufacturing activity and trying to grow out of that. And we have made some progress and just keep working on that.
So we'll just have nice plates of nasi lemak and then get in our Porsche. That sounds perfect.
Yeah. I think in a way because it's a nice place for people to go there, right? It's Malaysia
Yes, it is.
is always on top of the expats who would be sent overseas because it's cheap to live there. Quality of life is relatively good in the area. And then people are nice and it's relatively easy to set up team in Malaysia. It's easy to get loyalty among people. I think that's important whenever you set up an operation anywhere in the world. So that's the feedback that I got like from most of the companies. It's I mean loyalty is a big part for operations in Malaysia. Yeah, one of our advantages. Yeah.
And it's a wonderful characteristic. I was very fortunate to make good friends while I was doing my training around the country. And I have lifelong friends from that. And I don't take that for granted, but I really think it seems to be an important quality that many Malaysians, I won't say all Malaysians, many Malaysians have. And I certainly cherish those friends. So
Yeah.
it's a wonderful, we don't think of friends and employees together, but if you're going to have a disposition towards a characteristic, it's nice if employees are loyal, right? I mean, that would definitely be great.
Yeah. And also building relationship because that kind of transcends any business or transactional relationship, right? So
Absolutely.
so that's why like we have an office here and we're always open to talk to companies and listen what we can help, right? Even though we have certain institutional boundaries that we cannot cross, but at least we know how to connect to people and how do we make things work, right? And yeah, just try to facilitate as much as we can.
Well, that's terrific. And you are a terrific office and very open. And your events are terrific. I know the last year we had one of the ministers come over and you put on a really high powered, yet I love the way the Malaysians, and again, I may be overgeneralizing, but in my experience there, we would have these high level conversations and then we'd have these breaks where the food was like a meal. I mean, we would just outrageous amounts of food. And, this is where I think the pandemic must be really hard because work is such a social place, and Malaysians as a whole, which again grossly general, are such social people, and so friendly, and I really appreciated that, especially being from overseas and usually very jet lagged most of the time. And boy, it was like not enough food, not enough friendliness. Everyone was so cordial, and so it just seems like that pandemic would be extra hard. Let's talk a little bit about, I know there are not too many Malaysian companies in America, but have you got a sense, and this is kind of off the cuff, have you got a sense of how Malaysian companies are faring with the pandemic in America?
In America, yes, you're right. We don't have many Malaysian companies operating here. We have like some factories, I think in Arizona, I think just one of them. And then mostly our sales and engineering support office here, mainly to support the multinationals operating here, the likes of Intel, Google, and all that, because they're their customers, right?
Right.
So I think they have been faring well. In the beginning of the pandemic, most of them, they send their employees back to Malaysia, but there are also several companies who chose to have their employees to stay put in the US just to see things through, right? But unfortunately, like the pandemic kind of dragged on until today. But I want to quote an example. Like there is a company called Great Tech, a Malaysian company who does automation services for many notable US companies. They have easily 40, 50, or even 60 Malaysian engineers right now in the US, like serving those companies, right? So it's a matter of like, how do you compensate your employees to be willing to take the risk for the company and be here, and of course at the same time have to ensure that they're safe, right?
Absolutely.
So I think yeah, that's just how the situation is, and then in Malaysia, because we are I mean, a lot of our economic activities is surrounding manufacturing, so it involves close proximity between people, right, among operators and engineers and all that kind of stuff. So it's not easy to get through this pandemic without getting people to go to work. If not, then a lot of companies will just close shop, right? So that there is an ongoing effort on how do we automate companies in Malaysia, both foreign-owned companies or even the domestic companies, right? So we would provide some funding for them to basically engage one of the consultants, engage and access how ready they are for automation, and then we would support and link them to the proper automation companies and kind of like provide a solution for them to make sure that they're ready for future. So yeah, that's just some of the efforts that's ongoing and taken by my headquarters in KL. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We'll have another chat sometime about Malaysian business in America, but I think it's good to get both sides of the coin. And of course, we really appreciate everybody who's staying and making things work, because automation, it's almost like if you continue to explore AI and things of that nature for extending Malaysian business presence of American companies, it's almost like those engineers are working on the future for you, because automating all those things are what you folks want to do later, right? So I think it'll be worthwhile, but tough, but worthwhile.
Yeah, and
So,
and remote working is also like everyone's talking about that, right? And Malaysia is naturally a human capital factory. I think we have a lot of locally born Malaysians who actually serve in the board or even in the C positions for several Fortune 500 companies, even in the valley. So I think one thing that I see is that with this pandemic, that companies don't mind where you're located at. So I see companies here hiring people in Malaysia that, but we don't have an operation of that factory in the country, right? So in a way, things are getting more integrated, but in a globalized way, right? So without boundary anymore. Yeah.
do you think that will continue after the pandemic?
I kind of think, yeah, that will continue after the pandemic, because many people find that it's working well for them. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, even for us, MIDA, we have like never been really doing a lot of remote working before this, and as you would imagine, like government, a lot of documents are still in a physical copy. So this pandemic has kind of pushed us to automate stuff, put things into cloud, and even roll out a series of initiatives to basically digitalize our processes. Like manufacturing license, it used to take like at least 8 weeks to process and get an approval. But now we have created a platform that you just submit your details in and submit the application, and you can get that within 2 to 3 working days. So I think
That's terrific.
those are some of the positives that come out from the pandemic.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. You echo what many of our other guests have said around the world, that digital transformation has really been accelerated from the pandemic, and sounds like it will stay. Sounds very positive. You also talked about supply chain understanding and really a deeper understanding of how things are connected, is what I heard you say earlier. And so those are two unexpected silver linings, we would call them here in America, things that are good that came out of this situation. Is there anything else that is an unexpected benefit from the pandemic and the conditions it's created?
I think yeah, people, like generally companies tend to think, maybe they should diversify, because in the past maybe several of them have been intensifying their effort into several specific country, and through this pandemic, like we are getting conversation around, should we do more in Malaysia, right? So generally the conversation shifted from, rather than setting up their own operation, could they outsource some of the work into Malaysia? So that could really accelerate the whole process effort and kind of faster. So yeah, we're doing a lot in supporting those initiatives and trying to connect them to potential Malaysian companies, or even do a joint venture on several initiatives or business activities in that effort to try to do things while the border is not it's tricky to work around that.
Well, luckily, diplomacy and joint collaborations towards profitability and serving customers transcend borders, don't you think? As our conversation today has said.
Yes. One thing I really appreciate the US investors community is their openness to basically work with companies and people in Asia, especially Malaysia. So we really appreciate that support, and yeah, trying our best to help.
I think Malaysia's in an interesting position because there are such behemoths and giants like China in the region, and Malaysia doesn't always get its chance. But I will say, once people start to learn about Malaysia, it's an easy sell. You know, it's an easy understanding as to why you're successful as you know, from the people to the opportunities to the projects to the stability to the weather to the beauty. It's really such a wonderful package. It's just a question of awareness most of the time, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And on investment promotional front, like, so we are trying to be neutral geopolitically. So we welcome investors regardless of they're from China or they're from US, right? So we just want to offer a platform for people to grow, right? And we can provide people, we can provide infrastructure, and we can provide, you know, high technical skill sets. And yeah, so that's where we stand right now. Yeah, and how we look at ourselves.
Yes, and one of the things that's exciting to me and that I hope we'll work on one day is the growing venture ecosystem for startups in Malaysia. In fact, it's probably the only country I've come across, I'm certain it's not the only one, but the only one that I've come across, that angel investors had tax deductions the way we do here for charitable institutions. So, you know, there's definitely a growing startup infrastructure. Although you're focused on corporates, we do have audience members from startups. So I want to signal that I actually trained over 300 entrepreneurs there of all shapes and sizes, and that the economy, and I had the pleasure of being a mentor for Startup Malaysia for a year. So, you know, there's definitely all kinds of things happening there. And I'm so excited to speak with you today, CH. Thank you for your time and all the best to Malaysia well beyond the pandemic. It almost doesn't seem necessary, but I want to give you our very best regards to Newcom Global, and here's to your continued success.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, happy to participate your future event. You know, if it's about startup, like I can definitely pull in some people to do another one with you if let's say you're interested to do that.
Oh,
So
thank you.
Thank you for your support, and yeah, have a good day.
You're welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Again, it's Lucy Newcomb, CEO and host. And Newcom Global, we are here to help assist you. Global business from the inside out, go to market, market strategy, global leadership development. And we will be speaking next month with Soranju Jorgensen about life in Europe at the moment and how things are coping and changing and how companies there are managing. So please join us next month for that. Thank you again. If you'll stay on one more second, you'll see our contact information on the next slide. And thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe.